Another exciting edition of Drop the Mic coming to you from my new studios here. I don't know how I feel about this setup. I can see myself on camera now, which is troubling, as you can imagine. And I feel the need to do this all the time. I apologize for the microphone. We're working on it. We're in a new studio here. So we'll get to that. But this week, I think we're kind of closing the saga we've been following for the last over a month, I think. At least it feels that way with Joe Rogan and Brian Callen and all this shit. Seems like that storyline is coming to an end. I'll address a little bit of it because there's still some news trickling out. So Joe Rogan officially moving to Texas. Looks like his studio is pretty much done. I think he will be there for September for the Spotify launch. He'll be debuting on Spotify in September, and then exclusive, I think, to Spotify in 2021. I don't really give a shit. I'm curious to see how it works out. I think there's a little too much attention being put on where Joe Rogan and other podcasters will be physically seated while they do their show. I am curious to see if the level of guests changes or drops off at all. In LA, you obviously have all kinds of celebrities that are already out there. Certainly the comedians are all already out there. People going out there to promote stuff. So it will be interesting to see if that takes a dip a little bit. Another element I'm interested in is who goes with Joe. Again, not because I think it's all that interesting where they physically are. That seems to be overhyped in all this. But I am curious. It seems like Rogan's taking on an endeavor that I'm interested in. So there was an article published, and I'm not sure how much I believe this. It seems like a lot of guesswork, but they are listing comedians in Rogan's crew that are and are not going with Rogan to Texas. And the two that stood out to me were Tom Segura and Bert Kreischer. Now, the reason it felt like bullshit is because these guys have not announced it on their podcast. There's been no public acknowledgement as far as I can see. They have families. That would take a lot to logistically to get done. So I'm skeptical of that. But it seemed like the crew going with Rogan to Texas, at least according to this individual, is Bert Kreischer, Tom Segura, Brendan Schaub, Brian Callen still, and possibly Tony Hinchcliffe. So the reason I'm interested in that is that Rogan has mentioned the possibility of owning a comedy club. Well, I don't know if that would be buying something like Cap City Comedy Club that is already in business and does well, or did well before coronavirus, or just opening, Rogan's Laugh Shack or whatever the fuck, and kind of creating their own thing. But the reason I'm interested in that is because it could be the start of places opening up around the country where you see a little more of a scene. Guys like Nate Bargatze and Doug Stanhope kind of started this, where you see they realized you don't need to live in New York or Los Angeles if you're a traveling comedian. Maybe if you want acting work and shit like that, you kind of need to be centralized on one of the two coasts. But if you're Doug Stanhope and you're just traveling around every weekend anyways, doesn't matter if you're in LA or New York or Bisbee, Arizona. And Bargatze kind of did the same thing, living in Nashville. Now you see guys like Theo Vaughn and apparently Josh Wolf going to Nashville. That's the other reason I'm interested in it, is you see Brendan Schaub going to Texas, Theo Vaughn and Josh Wolf going to Nashville. Theo Vaughn and Josh Wolf each now do a podcast with Brendan Schaub, as Josh Wolf is replacing Brian Callen on The Fighter and the Kid. Will they do it separately? Because I think that kind of ruins the chemistry of a podcast. You see on these Zoom calls, Zoom shows, and StreamYard shows and shit, you get a lot of the someone throws in a comment and says, what What's that? Oh, okay, yeah. And the conversation loses steam, or jokes don't hit as hard. So a lot of them suck, quite frankly. And some people have figured it out, and some shows it's easier to do it on. But if everyone's going to be in different locations, I think that'll change a lot of podcasts as well. But I'm curious to see how it plays out as far as building a comedy scene out there in Texas. Rogan's gone to the extent of offering Joey Diaz a house. I guess he offered to buy him a house. At least that's the rumor. Joey Diaz says it was an offer he couldn't refuse. And then it kind of came out that he was going to set him up with a house down there. And that's what I'm curious to see, if they can kind of take that comedy scene away from Los Angeles and you start seeing people trickle to different places around the country. Now, in regards to actual news, or at least things that are a little more interesting, juicy, salacious, we had the RNC this week, and you're starting to see people lose their fucking minds again. Just related to comedy, you remember in 2016, around the time of the election, people were melting the fuck down. Amy Schumer and Patton Oswalt and honestly, mostly people you haven't really heard of started kind of making their name for criticizing Trump and having these Twitter meltdowns. You're starting to see it again a little bit. And the one that troubled me was Jim Gaffigan. And Jim Gaffigan is a funny guy. You can kind of easily make fun of him because, you know, he just talks about food and sort of being a dad and that type of shit. He's PG rated, I would say. But Gaffigan is a funny comedian, and he's one of the first guys I was ever interested in. His Comedy Central Presents I watched over and over again when I was a kid. So he's definitely funny. And he sells out arenas. So you can't, it's kind of what I say about Schumer. Even if you don't like the guy or the girl, you can't argue their success. So, but Gaffigan's made his bones being a clean comic, family friendly. You never really knew where he stood politically, and he didn't really care. Well, he is having a fucking meltdown. The other night after the RNC convention, he was tweeting until 1 o'clock in the morning, all sorts of shit about how it's time to panic, and this is very dangerous, and the world is coming to a fucking end. Well, I mean, we've had Trump for 4 years, and the world hasn't ended, other than people having their meltdowns on Twitter. Your day-to-day life isn't very different. If you delete all social media, for the most part, there are some changes to people's lives, but I don't think it seems to be any more than would happen under every other president we've had before. So Jim Gaffigan wants you to believe that the world is coming to an end. And he also said something I found interesting, where he says, I don't care if this ruins my career. That's an interesting stance to me. And it's another one of these comedians thinking they're being very brave by going against Trump. Now, it may hurt his career in the sense that there will be some Trump supporters that say, oh, fuck Jim Gaffigan, I'm not going to see him anymore. I think that number is pretty limited. I think the number of staunch Trump supporters that also were going to pay to see Jim Gaffigan, I don't know what that percentage was to begin with. So I think Jim Gaffigan's career is going to be just fine. In fact, it might be enhanced a little. But it will be sad to see it enhanced because now he becomes Mr. Political. Mr. Go vote for Biden and, fuck these MAGA people. Not that I give a shit what his politics are. It just seems like if you're a guy that made his bones on countering that and staying out of the fray, then this seems like an odd move, an odd path to go down. It seems like Trump broke another one. And it's very similar to this kid Josh from Barstool who was going at us over the weekend. You get so blinded by not wanting this guy in office that nothing else matters, and you're willing to say fucking anything, regardless of facts or context. You're just willing to throw shit out there to try and ruin Trump, which is fine, but it makes you look fucking insane, and I think caring that much about anything kind of makes you look insane. caring that much to the point where you're having a fucking meltdown on social media about politics, that makes you look nuts. And that's a bad look for Jim Gaffigan. And it kind of relates, I guess, to another story from earlier in the week with Jerry Seinfeld. Not that this was directly politics, but I do wonder why Seinfeld is getting involved in this at all. So a part owner of Stand Up New York wrote an article in the New York Times saying New York is dead. Jerry Seinfeld hammers him back. And it's funny to me because the original article got no attention, really. No one gave a shit. I mean, it was in the New York Times. So in that sense, some people noticed it, I guess. But it was not a trending topic or anything that anyone really gave a shit. And Jerry Seinfeld felt the need to come in and be this savior for New York. It just reminds me a little of the Gaffigan thing in the sense of, not necessarily stay in your lane, because I think Gaffigan should be able to talk politics if he wants on Twitter. And I think Jerry should be able to talk about, the city that he lives in. Sure. But it just felt a little like unnecessary grandstanding. And that's how I think they kind of relate. I don't want comics to have to stick to comedy and make us laugh, clown, but there is sometimes an element of get off your fucking high horse. You're a joke maker. Relax. Let's relax. You realize you notice the difference between airline food and regular food. What's the deal? Am I right, Jer? Stick to that type of shit. So immediately after I scold some comedians for grandstanding, I'm going to do some of the same because this story irked me. It didn't get a ton of attention, but it got a little traction earlier in the week and then kind of died down. But if you're not familiar with the show Patriot Act on Netflix, you're not alone. I didn't realize it was on for 6 seasons, apparently. I thought it was new. It was hosted by Hasan Minhaj, and then just recently, this month, canceled by Netflix. Apparently, it was on for 6 seasons, and every article I read about it tells me it was critically acclaimed and very popular. I never heard a fucking word about this. Hasan Minhaj got popular over the last couple of years, and to be honest, I assumed Hasan Minhaj was the guy that was kind of being boosted up because he's not a straight white guy, and his political ideology is the one you're allowed to have. But I checked out his stand-up, and while it's not for me, it certainly wasn't mockably bad. I think he's fine. It just wasn't my cup of tea. But Hasan Minhaj became kind of a very political guy, outspoken, and that's the sense that I got, at least from the clips I watched of Patriot Act, is that it's sort of the Daily Show, sort of what Jim Jeffries was kind of trying to do on Comedy Central. It was, topical social issues type of a show, and all the critics loved it, yet nobody watched it. You see that a lot happening now. But in this culture of eating your own, Hasan Minhaj, who is, by all accounts, very woke, now it's time to take him down. He lost his show, so there's nothing he can do for us anymore, so let's fucking ruin it. And Nur Nazreem, I hope I'm saying her name right. I apologize if I'm not. But tweeted out the other day that the Patriot Act, the TV show, very toxic environment. And they gaslit her. It was a traumatic experience, that mentally she'll never be able to shake, apparently. When asked for examples of this, they were not great. Apparently it's a mostly white writer's room, which is, I guess, a form of abuse now. Toxic language being used, that kind of stuff. And then other people on staff came out and kind of backed her up and said this was a traumatic experience. And listen, maybe it was. Maybe the writers of Patriot Act and the producers were being beaten every day and verbally abused, and they were forced to eat crumbs off the floor. I don't know. I was not there. But what I would suggest, and it's unfair to say, well, where's the evidence to the extent of, NER should not have to provide us with, video or forensic evidence. I get that. That would be difficult. But maybe throw us an anecdote. Throw us a couple of stories. That would help your case. Because if you just say, oh, it was so traumatic. Oh, frankly, I can't even get into it. That's how bad it was. Well, at least me, you got a hard time selling me on that. I have a hard time believing that if you can't at least muster up a couple of stories. So tell us what happened. You got to get past this. I can't even speak about it because you're speaking about it. I get that if maybe it's hard to talk about a traumatic experience, but you've decided to talk about it and you've decided to put people's careers on the lines. That's what you see with Ellen. And I'm starting to wonder, was Ellen a toxic work environment, or is it a culture of people who have kind of been coddled throughout childhood and told they're right and told everything they say matters and told they shouldn't be spoken to in impolite tones, now working in a super serious, toxic, quote unquote, work environment, and they can't handle it. That's what I wonder. Is it just you have a tough fucking boss and you're not used to dealing with that? Well, that might suck. It sucks for a lot of people that have to deal with that stuff all around the country in all sorts of fields. You happen to be writing for a popular television show that is critically acclaimed, which seems preferable to having a shitty boss on a roofing job in the summer in fucking Arkansas. That seems like a worse gig. But it's fine to complain about your job. This grandstanding, again, to use that term, and thinking that everyone has a plight and everyone has a story and everyone has a struggle. That's my problem with these. And to just throw that out there, Hasan Minhaj was raised up as this woke guy, and no one's directly accusing him of anything, but his name gets thrown out in these stories. And then it becomes, well, are you saying Hasan Minhaj harassed you? Are you trying to ruin his career now or not? And you saw the same thing with Ellen. Well, it's like, well, the producers are taking blame. But even if Ellen's a tough fucking boss, who cares? I'm sure Ellen's dealing with a lot running that show every day. Maybe she doesn't have time to dance and be all warm and fuzzy behind the scenes. So give us some examples of how you were verbally abused and traumatized and all that stuff. And then maybe I'll be on board. But it just seems like not a lot of evidence is being thrown out there in order to try and take down people's careers because your job ended. You'd be a lot braver. People say, oh, it's very brave of NER and these other people to come out against Patriot Act. We'll be a lot braver while the show was on. Not quite so brave once you already lost your job. I don't know if that's as brave, but maybe it'll inspire other people to be more brave down the road. So before we get into some actual comedy, finally, I'll give you a couple quick updates on something I mentioned last week. That Without a Country podcast with Joe DeRosa and Corinne Fisher. I followed up this week to check out the episode, see if there was any fighting. It was pretty much an hour and change of them apologizing to each other and saying how much they love each other. And it seemed like two generally nice people that didn't want to be involved in a fight. Kind of a shame if you're looking for some juicy gossip, some salacious podcasting. But, overall, it was a fine. If you're a fan of that podcast, I think maybe you'd enjoy it. But if you're someone that's just checking in for the fighting, you'd be disappointed. You didn't get a lot out of it, unfortunately. But that's probably the healthier thing for those two. And also, briefly mention Ari Shaffir, president of the Legion of Skanks. It was a silly bit that they did, but actually very funny, and I think it ended in a hilarious way. And I'm surprised Ari Shaffir has a career because he has done something for the second time that, frankly, I'm amazed he's gotten away with. But it seems like he has good friends. So check out those podcasts, if you want. Just following up on some stuff we talked about last week. But the reason I talk about all this sort of news related to comedy is because there hasn't been a lot going on in the world of stand-up. You're seeing specials really slow down and getting released because no one's been able to shoot anything in 5 months and no one was prepared for this. So the amount of stuff cranking out has really slowed down. So what I decided to do, at least this week, and if you guys want to keep sending me people, then I'm happy to do it. But what I wanted to do is kind of review, I guess, a comedian that I wouldn't typically mention, but that a lot of people ask me about. So the first one, I actually got this again. I've got it a few times throughout the podcast, but again, someone reached out the other day and asked me my thoughts on Sebastian Maniscalco. And so I wanted to give him a review because Sebastian's a guy that's gotten very popular. Again, sells out arenas, sells out fucking 10,000 seats. So whether you like him or not, there is a talent there. But Sebastian's audience is typically families, these old school Italian families or maybe older couples, whatever. That's kind of his target audience. Reminds me a lot of, actually, the person that asked me about this, I think Texas Minifan mentioned this to me the other day. That it seems very similar to Everybody Loves Raymond. That was my first thought when I saw Sebastian Maniscalco. Is his entire act is essentially, a few episodes of Everybody Loves Raymond. This old school Italian guy just can't get with the times. His wife is a nag. Oh, being with kids is such a pain. And my parents, are they a nightmare? So it's kind of that vibe. And I think there's a place for that. I have no issue with it. But I do see a lot of the praise that Sebastian Maniscalco gets. For example, he hosted the MTV Movie Awards or the Video Music Awards, and which seemed like it was the Video Music Awards. Seemed like an incredibly odd fit to have Sebastian Maniscalco there because it's literally fucking teenagers in the audience and at home watching. And it's Sebastian Maniscalco going, "What's the deal with you got? Guys, you gotta deal with this Uber." And I feel like a lot of the laughs Sebastian Maniscalco gets are from the way he emphasizes words. Uber, you taking the Uber? I mean, I just don't get it. I just don't. I mean, why would you? I don't know. And the emphasis he puts on things and his physical mannerisms all seem to be very funny. As a blind guy, you might be able to see why the physical stuff doesn't really work for me. But that's what people that like Sebastian Maniscalco like. For me, it seems like we've seen it a million times. Like I said, Ray Romano was the first one that comes to mind. But he seems like, he would have crushed in the 70s and 80s. But to Sebastian Maniscalco's credit, there would have been 100 of those guys in the 70s and 80s. Now there's, one or two. So I think he's kind of cornered the market on that. And I think maybe he appeals to an older audience. I think if you're my age and younger, or if you like the comedians that I typically talk about, if you're a fan of Big J. Okerson or Dave Attell or Jim Norton or these guys, I don't know if Sebastian Maniscalco is necessarily going to be for you. I think if you like a nice PG night in with the family, give him a try. But if you're used to laughing at Jim Jeffries or Artie Lang stories, then Sebastian Maniscalco is probably not going to do it for you. So that's my take on Sebastian Maniscalco. Feel free to let me know at Drop the Mic YT at BlindMic _ your thoughts, and let me know any comedians you want me to talk about in the future. I guess I'll throw a number out there for Sebastian Maniscalco. In my personal book, I give him a 5.4. I think he's above average, even though he's not for me. There might be a couple things I laugh at, but he's kind of right in that average center where I'm not sneezing at it, but I'm not seeking it out either. So anyone you want me to review down the road, feel free. Guys that I haven't really discussed before, but maybe that you're a fan of, or maybe someone you hate that you don't understand their popularity. Feel free to shout me at Drop the Mic YT. And until next time, we'll see you later on Drop the Mic.